Ah, the sounds of Saturday morning. And Saturday evening. And there goes the neighbour's ute. Petrol, gas and diesel, all on the naughty list when it comes to climate change, emissions and burning fossil fuels. All subjects a lot of people are sick of hearing about.
It's lovely that we've got some worthies that want to send me letters. I just encourage them to send the letters to other countries.
I think it would be fair to say that this government does not have a great record on climate policy.
So if the government's not particularly interested, why should you be? And why should you take notice of a report that counts up all the fossil-fuelled machines people own and produces lots of numbers around converting them to electricity?
Doesn't take us anywhere, doesn't solve anything, certainly doesn't keep kids off social media. Do you know there's 64 boilers in the country run by petrol or gas? Whoop-de-doo.
Well, what if I told you that if Kiwi households upgraded 6 million of the most easily electrifiable machines, they'd save the country about $8 million a day. And bonus, ditching those fossil-powered gadgets and old cars would slash 7.5 million tonnes of carbon emissions each year. Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, I'm talking to Newsroom senior political and climate change reporter Mark Dulder about changing the landscape on energy, and also to electricity evangelist Mike Casey, the CEO of Rewiring Aotearoa. That's the group behind the machine count report and a new policy manifesto on electrification that the Energy Minister is showing some interest in. Mike runs a fully electric cherry orchard in central Otago, and he's had a go on Instagram at ZB's Mike Hosking, who's described his report as a waste of time.
You can't change what you don't measure, right? So if you picked out one particular data point in our machine count, like the 505,000 push lawnmowers, you could say that that's a really interesting stat, but it's not going to really get us anywhere. But at the same time, it's really important that we have all the numbers of machines in one place so that we can actually figure out policy to accelerate the electrification of those machines to bring down our emissions and fix our economy. So it's been about getting all of this data from all over the different repositories of New Zealand, bringing it all together into one place and giving us a really clear indication of the numbers of different types of machines that exist out there.
It's quite honest, this report. I mean, you have got yellow and red sections after the green, which are either not ready or you're not quite ready to be defossilised. Is that the sort of thing that you push aside and concentrate on the things we can change?
Yeah, when you're talking about electrification, especially with a reasonably traditional Kiwi bloke, the immediate thing that the conversation moves to is, I've got no option to electrify my 200 horsepower diesel tractor, or electrification of international aviation is still a long way away. And so it's really important to quantify, we've got 10 million machines in New Zealand, 8.5 million of them, the technology exists within New Zealand to electrify them right now. 1 million of them, the technology exists somewhere in the world, but for whatever reason, they're difficult for us to electrify. And there's about 700,000 machines in New Zealand that, the technology just doesn't exist to electrify yet. And it's a way of breaking that conversation open to make it less about the 200 horsepower tractors and more about all the small machines that exist in the home where there's a significant economic and emissions opportunity for our country.
Yeah, I see jet skis are on the red list. Why do we have jet skis at all? And leaf blowers, why do they exist?
We'll go with leaf blowers first of all. I've never really understood why someone needs a leaf blower. That didn't make much sense to me at all. But we have a leaf blower here on our orchard and it never really got used. And to the point that we installed a huge amount of solar panels on our farm. And all of a sudden I was using the leaf blower to blow the snow in winter off the solar panels so that we could continue to generate electricity. So that has become a really useful point. Things like jet skis, I kind of agree with you. I've never really had a fascination with jet skis before, but when you go to Lake Wanaka or down to my local lake, Lake Dunstan here in Cromwell, in the middle of summer, there's dozens of jet skis out there. So I think the main thing here is to, understand the different machines that New Zealanders use and why they use them. And at the same time, then figure out whether there needs to be a policy around the electrification of jet skis. I think the answer is right now, there's not a lot of products out there in the world that exist to replace that, but it is coming. And, as a result, maybe we'll focus on the cooktops and the way that we do our hot water cylinders first, and worry about the jet skis later. But the other thing that we've learned in this whole electrification discussion is that we don't really want to look at banning things or removing things, because it actually creates an allergic reaction from a certain section of society, which is unproductive for the overall electrification message. So one of the things that we saw in America when, they looked at banning gas cooktops as an example, and there's all the reasons to look at getting rid of gas cooktops out of homes and out of restaurants. And you had celebrity chefs, handcuffing themselves to their gas cooktops, basically saying, over my dead body, will you remove gas from my restaurant?
Cooking with gas.
Cooking with gas.
We all cook better when we're cooking with gas.
Gas is so hot it's not on when it's off. It's the only way to cook. That's what I was taught. Now here's a fact you should have to know to pass. 9 out of 10 chefs only cook with gas.
And so you want to make sure you avoid that allergic reaction at the same time. And so what this comes down to is, there needs to be a policy of, we know how many gas cooktops there are in New Zealand. First step is to probably look at getting them out of the home.
The IEA estimates that cooking resulted in nearly 500 million tonnes of CO2 emissions in 2020.
But again, it's not about banning them. It's about making sure that we provide the right arguments to make people realise just how silly it is to combust fossil fuels in your kitchen.
Cooking with gas is great, let's face it. But in a few years' time, there might not be a lot of gas around, or it might have got so expensive that it's just not worth it.
Well, I think there's two things here. One is, I would argue with you like that. Not argue with you. I'd have a friendly discussion with you about how my induction cooktop is way better than your gas cooktop, and we can go down that path, and that's all really well and good. The other part of this, though, is the energy, and you talked about the the cost associated with energy and how gas is running out in this country. So that's a good economic argument. But the one that I find always sticks the most is that gas and the particulates, the result of burning gas, are heavier than air. And so when that happens, they actually fall down to the ground. And so for any young mother or young parent with a child that might be crawling around, it is a particularly toxic environment if they're crawling around anywhere near that gas stove at the time.
A child living with gas cooking in the home has a comparable risk of asthma to a child living with household cigarette smoke.
And that's actually the way that you start to win people over on there's just better ways of cooking food.
Okay, maybe inside, but, what about the 1,316,620 barbecues?
The gas barbecues.
You will not get your Kiwi bloke away from his gas barbecue.
The Kiwi blokes don't need to worry, because I'm not going after gas barbecues, because we've counted the number of gas barbecues. We know the utilisation rate of the average gas barbecue in New Zealand. The emissions are so small from those gas barbecues. We're going after things like gas hot water heating, which uses far more energy than those gas barbecues. And, at some point, those gas barbecues will probably need to be replaced because we're running out of gas, or gas needs to be, gas is going to get more and more expensive. When that happens, there's other technology available. There are electric barbecues available now. I've got one. I would have to say in that particular instance, it's not quite as good as the gas barbecue when it comes to cooking sausages. It takes about twice as long. But we now have, electric barbecues that are coming out that run off an oven plug, so have a lot more power associated with them. And as a result, you can get that same effect. But as I was saying before, it's about counting all these machines is about creating the priorities New Zealand needs. And right now, I don't think it's a priority to go after my uncle's gas barbecue.
So when we talk about the electrification of these machines, we've got a couple of issues here. Is there enough electricity to go around? And are there enough batteries to make it worthwhile?
Yep. So that's a really good question. I think the first thing that I would say is just to ground us with some context. We're going to need about twice as much electricity to replace all of the fossil fuels within our economy, and that's not including adding new machines in or new energy demands from new types of industries that might form over the next couple of decades, but just to replace the machines in New Zealand. And one of the things that we've always patted ourselves on the back for in New Zealand is about how renewable our electricity system is, but it's really important to understand that is just a subset of our total energy system. And I think our total energy system is 73% of the energy we consume in this country is fossil fuels. So we need about double the energy or double the electricity to actually replace that 73% of the energy that we use. A lot of that replacement comes from just the efficiency gains associated with electric machines over fossil fuel machines. They're way more efficient. And the rough calculation we've worked out is about twice the amount of electricity that we're going to need. So yeah, we need a lot more. That is going to come from more generation at our centralized power plants. That's the creation of new generation. But the argument that we're making at Rewiring Aotearoa is actually a lot of that is going to come from the farms and the households and the small businesses of New Zealand. So, if you put if 80% of the households in New Zealand put solar panels on their roof, that's going to create about an extra 60% renewable generation for New Zealand's electricity system right there. If all the farmers did what I did, that's about another 40%. So, if you had huge solar penetration in New Zealand, you could pretty much double the amount of energy just from the households alone. Households and farms alone, sorry.
Let's look at solar. And there's been a very cautionary tale. Solar Zero customers trapped with high fees. Everyone wants out. Mm-hmm. We did a podcast a couple of years ago about Solar Zero saying, the technology had advanced a lot and the batteries and the finance, it's all looking good for solar. Now they're bust. They're gone. How do you get over that hugely bad publicity to say, put solar on your roof?
Yeah, I think it's like the easiest way that I can say that is Kodak didn't define camera technology. So we're talking about two different things here. We're talking about a company that puts solar on residential properties in New Zealand, and then we're talking about the technology of solar. Now, really, when you boil down what Solar Zero was, it was a financing company. It helped relieve the upfront capital cost of solar installations for the households of New Zealand. And because there was no upfront capital cost, you had a lot of New Zealanders sign up because they realized that they could get, some form of cheaper power coming through. But what actually happened over, the course of a few years is that the price of solar panels and the price of batteries absolutely plummeted. And as a result of that, people started to realize very, very quickly that it was far, far cheaper for you to, say, finance a new solar system on your mortgage, especially with some of those bank packages that are available, than it was to finance through something like a Solar Zero operation. And as a result, their cost of acquisition got really high. And as a result of that, eventually, I think, BlackRock decided to pull out from that. So the whole thing in this is that, yes, it's I really do feel for those customers in New Zealand that are trapped in this situation, but it is a finance instrument construct, I guess, rather than being something that is a direct reflection of the actual technology that we're talking about here.
Well, some of the customers in the wash-up, as you say, are saying that they weren't even saving that much on electricity.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that's a very fair statement as well. Like, I think early on, it might have been oversold or it might have looked like they were saving a lot of money. But what I can tell you on the flip side of this is that the average household in New Zealand is paying about 35 cents a kilowatt hour for power they receive from New Zealand's electricity grid. And when you look at annualizing the costs of a solar installation and financing it on your mortgage at, say, 5.5%, it's about a third of the cost of that. It comes in at about 13 cents. So you can see there's a massive savings opportunity between the solar panels and New Zealand's electricity grid. The problem is when you get a finance company sitting in the middle of that savings quickly gets eroded.
But it's not practical for everybody. Landlords reluctant to put that sort of investment in so that their tenants can save power. There's a lot of shaded buildings. In Auckland, everything's a 3 or 4 story building now, and there's multiple tenants in that building. You can't sort of just say everyone's got to go solar. Sometimes it's not practical.
Yeah, and so the thing here is I think what a lot of New Zealanders do is they make the mistake of going, I'm going to do solar and not do the grid. And it's not an either-or situation. What I can tell you is that the cheapest energy that you're ever going to get is energy that you can generate via a solar panel on the property that is going to consume that energy. But you're not necessarily going to be able to cover all of your energy requirements. But the important thing to understand is that every solar panel you install ultimately does bring down the price of power. And there are particular circumstances where this is not, in a case of where there's a house with, say, a lot of trees around it, that is not practical or it doesn't bring down the cost of power. But we think about 80% of the homes in New Zealand probably could benefit from solar panels. Doesn't mean they'll be generating all of the power that they use, but they will be able to bring down their cost of energy as a result of doing it. And the second part of this is talking about landlords and tenants. That is that's one of New Zealand's really wicked problems at the moment is if you install solar panels on a rental property, it's the landlord that has to pay for those solar panels, but the reward comes from the tenant. And we've been working pretty hard in our policy manifesto through rewiring to try and figure out different ways that we can either incentivize landlords to do this or give the tenants some agency to negotiate with their landlord and make it a bit of an easier yes.
And when it comes to apartment blocks, Mark Dilder's been keeping an eye on developments overseas.
There are kind of some pretty cool innovations. One of the things Rewiring would like to see happen is some regulatory change to allow what's called plug-in solar. And you see this in Europe and Germany in particular, where they've obviously got quite dense housing. People have these small, you can pick them up with your hands, balcony solar panels that they clip onto the balconies and they can plug into things and power it with solar that way. And so there are innovations coming online to be able to make that technology more accessible, even for those who don't necessarily have their quarter acre and a big north-facing roof to put the solar panels on.
I think we are at a point where the energy system of New Zealand is failing New Zealanders so miserably with the price of energy going up dramatically, the shortage of energy when it doesn't rain, the winter crunches, all of those kinds of things, that we're moving to an appetite of needing to see real change in the energy space. And the biggest thing that we see as being change in the energy space is actually around making sure that customers can generate and store their own electricity. Now, where we're at the moment is it looks like I don't think solar on the roofs of New Zealand households or on farms needs a subsidy anymore because the economics stacks up so well for it.
Does that include batteries?
No, this is the thing. When it comes to batteries, there is no strong economic signal for batteries in the home yet, even though when you take a high-level approach or a high-level look at it, batteries would do an absolute wonderful thing for our energy system from a resilience perspective. Whenever there's a power cut, the home will still have electricity. Right through to installing batteries in homes removes homes from, those congestion periods, which means we need to build out less poles and wires and less infrastructure as well. But there isn't a reward for that for the customer yet. So we're sort of fighting at the moment with Rewiring Aotearoa to make sure that the tariffs are reflective or the energy system pricing is reflective so that those with batteries can be rewarded for helping to bring down the cost of the energy system for everyone. And in lieu of a change, then the other way of doing that is through something like a subsidy, which we've seen in Australia now, which is, well, if you're not going to, pay for the batteries in the open free markets that we're so proud of, then the other way of doing this is to make sure that batteries are incentivized at point of sale through something like a subsidy.
Mike says now what we need is access to cheap finance to get homeowners to buy those batteries, to get gas out of homes, maybe even to replace the old petrol car with an EV. Rewiring Aotearoa laid out how that could happen in its new policy manifesto. Newsroom's Mark Dilder says it has nearly 60 recommendations, some of which the government has indicated a willingness to look at.
And openness to a particular key policy in there around how to fund home solar, using council's high kind of credit ratings, but without putting the debt on council balance sheets or the government having to stump up a bunch of money to do it either. The government itself, central government, would only have to stump up for the setup costs, which would be $2 to $6 million. So for someone like Simon Watts, the Climate and Energy Minister, who really does want to see a deployment of solar, it's a great cost of living, policy because it helps people reduce their energy bills. And that's one of the big growing aspects of our household bills at the moment. Only having to pay $2 or $6 million, not getting the government directly in the business of subsidizing solar, but still being able to give that industry a big boost is pretty appealing.
How open are the government's ears to this subject?
I think it would be fair to say that this government does not have a great record on climate policy. I think that Rewiring has done a good job of finding a niche where actually maybe there can be some progress from the government because a lot of this is about household bills and cost of living, and the government was elected on cost of living. And if you look at what's in the budget, the most recent one, there's actually not a lot there for cost of living either. I think having Simon Watts as the energy minister makes a big difference as well. There was a sense in the sector that Simeon Brown, the previous energy minister, was somewhat ideologically just opposed to some of these clean and green technologies, although even that sounded like it was starting to shift as the benefits became apparent when the pylon fell down, you may remember, last year. Yeah, and cut off Northland from the rest of the grid. The review into that incident found that $20 million in damages and losses were avoided because of solar that was available up in Northland to keep parts of the grid running. The sense that the sector gets from Simon Watts is he's much more all in on this, on the potential benefits here. It's just the difficulty of actually getting it past everyone in the coalition, not just the coalition partners, but also even those within National who, again, don't want to be aligning themselves with technologies that maybe they view as woke or left-wing or something like that.
Where do you think we are at as a nation mentally on switching on to these ideas?
I think it's a journey that we're just getting started on, right? People really can seem quite resistant to new technologies, and I don't think there's anything behind that other than people don't like change, and particularly if there's a sense that someone's telling you what to do, people don't like that. And also a lack of resource for people knowing what it's like to try something different. So I'm a climate journalist. I have been for 5 years. Recently got an electric vehicle, and as part of that process I learned a significant amount about EVs that I hadn't known despite my 5 years of writing quite a lot about them, because it's quite different to actually own one. And so the ability to go and ask friends who had an electric vehicle, hey, what do you do with this, or what do you think about that, was really helpful. And hopefully as people adopt more and more of these electric technologies, that becomes a more widespread thing, right? So there are lots of myths that you hear. Some of them are fossil fuel industry propaganda, and sometimes it's just people just not being sure what the best tool is, what the best solution is. Even I, when I left my electric vehicle plugged in at home while I was away for a few days, I was a little bit worried about the fire risk. And the reality is 2 weeks earlier, I had a spirited discussion, shall we say, on email with a reader about this exact issue, that EVs are less likely than fossil fuel vehicles to be involved in fire, that there's lots of studies that have been done on that, et cetera, et cetera. But the stuff that you hear, it can be sometimes so compelling that actually, despite having looked at the evidence, I wasn't convinced until I'd kind of done it myself and then come home and been like, cool, no fire, everything's fine. And then if someone comes along and asks me, yeah, I can provide them with the evidence and the figures. But actually, probably what I'd say is, I don't worry about it. I do it all the time, never had a problem. And that's probably going to be more convincing for the majority of people than, here are these studies, here's this data.
It does take people a long time to change.
It does. And that's part of the opportunity and the risk, right? The risk is when your machine at home that's fossil fueled, that's gas or petrol or diesel if it's a car, breaks and you replace it with a new fossil fueled one, you're probably going to have that for several decades. That's a risk, right? Is that for every new gas hot water system, gas cooktop that's put in, that's going to be there for a long time burning gas, and it's going to be bad for the environment. It's going to be bad for the people using that device, particularly if it's a cooktop, because there are health concerns around burning gas in the home. But also financially, the prices of gas are only going to go up from now on because the supplies are dwindling. And as much as Shane Jones might like to say that there's plenty offshore to be found, we've been looking for 20 years and haven't found any yet. The opportunity on the flip side is a lot of our machines are old. The average age of a car in the New Zealand fleet is more than 14 years old. And so quite frequently over the next few years, many of the people listening to this are going to have 1 or 2 or 3 of their fossil-fueled machines come to their end of life. And that's an opportunity to electrify them at that point. It doesn't have to be that you right now go home and tear out everything that runs on fossil fuels from your home, even if you just installed it, and replace it with an electric thing. It's that once it's time to pick something new, go for the best option, the one that, might cost a little bit more upfront, although that's still changing, but will save you more money in the long term. And the role for government and the private sector as well is to ensure people have access to the right information about being able to make the smart financial decisions, and also the finance that they might need in order to deal with some of that higher upfront cost and enjoy those savings from day one.
As for Mike Casey, he says electrifying your home is an emissions and a financial slam dunk.
I think everyone in New Zealand is on their own journey when it comes to climate. And what we've found particularly potent is that it doesn't matter whether you're a 1 or a 10 on climate. The moment that you turn to talking about the economics of this is when everybody starts listening.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Mark Chesterman. Thanks to Mike Casey and Mark Dulder. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.